Today I'm going to share with you not one, but three stories that happened to the same group of hunters over a 1 week period earlier this year. Each one of these hunters had their own experience, and each experience gets truly more bizarre, and if you stick around to the end, you'll find out why. But before we get into today's encounters, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you'd like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a return viewer, please hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, grab your rattling antlers or rattle in that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. In June of 2024, so this past summer, three friends, Ryan, Don, and Ty, were beyond looking forward to the upcoming deer season at the end of August. These three guys, they live for hunting. It was one of their favorite things to do. And every year, come June, they became like kids before Christmas. They would count down the sleeps until the start of deer season. And this year was no different. They knew, though, that they had a lot of preseason work to do if they want to have a successful hunting season. So starting in June, even though they knew this area incredibly well, they would spend their weekends making the hour-long drive from Winnipeg out to the arm of Whitemouth to go set up trail cameras, set up tree stands, and even do scouting hunts to help increase their chances during the upcoming season. While going out every weekend might seem a little bit excessive, this area that they were hunting is absolutely massive. It's not a typical 80-acre deer lease like a lot of folks down south may be used to. This is actually 4 separate properties that spans an absolutely massive area of well over 2,000 acres. It's a mix of agriculture fields, cattle pastures, and dense bush. These guys, when they would go set their cameras every year, this was a multi-day endeavor for them. It was not just go out to the farm for a couple of hours. It took several days to wander around this massive area, setting up trail cameras, and then it would take just as long every year for them to set up their tree stands. They did this pretty much the entire summer long, right up until the end of August. Once the end of August rolled along, it was now the time that they had been looking forward to for the last couple of months, and it was time to put all that hard work to the test. It was now the start of archery season. That morning, unfortunately, Don would not be joining them. He got stuck having to work, so it was only going to be TJ and Ryan heading out for this hunt. That morning, TJ woke up super early. He made his way over to Ryan's place. They loaded up Ryan's truck. Then they made that hour-long drive from Winnipeg out to Whitemouth. They had already predetermined where they were going to be sitting that morning based on pictures and based on wind for the morning, and where they were going to be going was the far north quarter section of the area where they hunt. So once they got to that quarter section, Ryan turned the truck off to the left, drove down into this ditch, parked his truck right up along a bush line. They got out, they grabbed all their gear, and then they started making their way to where they were going to be sitting. Now, to get where they had to go along this barley field that ran for about 400 yards. It follows a bush line to the north, and then it slightly turns to the northeast. Shortly after that turn to the northeast, this barley field completely ends and it turns to alfalfa. From there, this alfalfa field runs for about 300 yards to the north to this big open clearing. Off on the west side, off to the left, there's a big water hole, and off to the east on the right, there's a cut line that goes from that alfalfa field over to a soybean field about 300 yards away. And where they were going to be sitting that morning was right on that cut line. So once the two guys made their way through that barley field, they made their way around that corner, got to that spot where the barley turns to alfalfa, they continued towards that cut line. Once they got to where the cut line starts at the alfalfa, they kind of waved to each other, wished each other luck, and from there, Ryan made his way right to this little cluster of trees where he had cut down a bunch of trees before and kind of made himself a little bit of a bunker blind. He got into there and he watched TJ make his way further down the cut towards this other water hole about 300 yards away. Once they were both in position, they settled in for the morning's hunt. That morning, they did see quite a few deer, but nothing that they were really ready to put their tags on this early in the season. And after about 4 hours of sitting, they decided that was it. They were going to call it for the morning. From there, they ended up both meeting up at that alfalfa field. Once they met up, they decided that they were going to go and change out the SD cards on the few trail cameras that they had on that particular parcel of land. So they made their way over to the first camera, which was located right on that cut line. They walked up to the camera, opened it up, and almost immediately TJ turned, looked at Ryan, and he just looked completely annoyed. Ryan looked at him and said, "What's wrong, man?" And TJ's like, "The camera's off." And Ryan's like, "That doesn't make sense. I was the last one that put an SD card in this camera, and I know that I turned that one back on." After kind of arguing about it for a couple of minutes, they decided, you know what? It was just an honest mistake, and they turned the camera on, closed the cover back up, and then they made their way to the second camera, which is located at the far northern side of the property, right on the edge of that alfalfa clearing. Once they got up to that camera, TJ made his way up to it. He opened up the front cover, looked, and again turned and looked at Ryan, again just looking completely annoyed, and said, "This one's off too." Ryan's standing there just kind of thinking in his head, how is this possible? I know I turned these cameras on. And again, after a short little bit of an argument, they both decided, you know what, just an honest mistake. We've both done this before. So they turned the camera back on. Then they made their way back to the trucks. Once they got back to the truck, they made their way over to those other properties. They checked multiple other trail cameras, all of which were on. And as the day progressed further towards the evening, they made their way back to that spot where they had hunted in the morning, and they settled in for the evening hunt in the same spots that they had hunted that morning. And again, just like that morning, they saw several deer, but nothing that they were really ready to tag this early yet. Over the next couple of weekends, it was pretty much the same routine. They would head out typically on a Saturday morning. They would hunt in the morning. They would spend the entire afternoon checking trail cameras. They would hunt in the evening, all the way up until the end of September. The last weekend of September, which was the final weekend in this area of archery before the start of muzzleloading season, TJ asked Ryan if it would be okay if he brought his girlfriend along for this final hunt. She was starting to show some interest in taking up hunting, and TJ thought this particular day coming up would be absolutely perfect because the weather was going to be quite nice. The bugs had already started to die down, and he figured this would be the perfect opportunity to get her out in the bush so she could see what's pretty much been consuming them for the past month. Ryan, of course, said that's not a problem, but you know what? Take your own truck just in case I have to head back to the city. That way I don't ruin both your days. So on that Sunday morning, TJ woke up super early, about 2:30 in the morning, as always. Him and his girlfriend started making their way out to Whitemouth. He kept calling Ryan, and Ryan was not answering his phone. Shortly after TJ and his girlfriend arrived out in Whitemouth, they got a call from Ryan. Ryan was telling them, you know what, sorry, I slept through my alarm. I'm going to get out there a little bit late. I'm probably not going to be out there till the start of legal light. And then he asked them where they were going to be hunting, just so that he would not ruin their hunt by walking up on them or walking near them right at first light. TJ told him that they were going to go hunt over in his ladder stand on the property south of where they had hunted on opening day. And Ryan said, you know what, that's perfect. I was planning on going to that north quarter, so even if I get there late, I'm not going to mess you up. With that, they wished each other luck. Ryan continued gathering up all of his stuff, tossed it into his truck, and then he too made that drive out to Whitemouth. Once he got there, he parked his truck in that same spot where he had parked opening day. He grabbed his bow, he grabbed his pack, and he started making his way back up towards that cut line. That morning, as he was walking through that barley field right where it turns, he all of a sudden noticed up ahead, right on the edge of the barley, close to the bush line, there was something in the field, and he kind of stopped, who was looking towards it, trying to figure out what this thing was. And he's looking, and it appeared to him to be this mound of hay right by the bush line. Now, he did know that there was another fellow that had permission to hunt on this property, particularly hunt geese. So his first thought was that this is most likely a goose blind. So he took a couple of steps towards it, and sure enough, that's exactly what this was. And almost instantly, Ryan was feeling very annoyed, because now he didn't know if this goose blind, if the guy that was hunting here was hunting there the day before, if he was taking lots of shots, because if he was, that was definitely going to spook the deer in the area. And he also didn't know if this guy was going to be coming that morning or not, which would make things even worse for him based on the wind, because if this guy was in this blind, his scent would be blowing directly towards where Ryan was going to be, and nothing was going to move in between those two spots. So Ryan was feeling at this point pretty defeated, but he's like, you know what, I'm already here. I'm just going to walk up to where my bunker blind is. Maybe I'll see something. So he made his way to his bunker blind, and he settled in for the morning's hunt. About an hour later, he caught a glimpse of something moving off to his right, so he quickly turned his head, looked down the cut, and sure enough, there were 3 does and a fawn making their way from one chunk of bush to the next. At this point, Ryan did not grab his bow. He's very adamant about not shooting does if they have fawns, so he just sat there, watched these deer make their way into the bush. A few minutes later, he reached down beside him, he grabbed his drink, took a few swigs, and as soon as he did that, it kind of triggered a coughing fit in him. So he ended up coughing about 4 or 5 times in a row. He was trying to be quiet, but he just could not control it. He had to let these coughs out. And almost immediately after coughing, he heard coughing behind him in the bush about 50 yards away. At this point, Ryan was incredibly ticked off. His first thought went back to that goose hunter, and he was thinking that, great, this guy's in the bush, he's mimicking me now. I'm not going to see anything with this guy in the bush making noise on top of my coughing. So he was really feeling even more defeated at this point. But he decided he would just sit there for about another half an hour, and then he would call it quits for the morning. So about a half hour later, he gathered up his gear, and he started making his way back towards his truck, expecting once he got around that corner of the barley that he was going to see a quad, or he was going to see that guy, or maybe even see his truck parked up by his. But once he made his way around that corner, he saw no evidence of this guy at all. There was no quad parked in the bush, there was nobody in that blind, and there was no truck parked up by him. Ryan at this point's like, this does not make sense. There's no quad, there's no truck, so who's in the bush and how did they get there? But again, he figured, you know what, this is definitely that goose hunter. He's probably just ticked off that I'm even here this morning, so he was just messing with me. And with that, he made his way back to his truck. Once he got to his truck, he sent TJ a quick text telling him that his morning hunt was ruined and that he was going to head back to the city and that he was not sure if he was going to be coming back out that evening or not. TJ responded with, okay, that sounds good. Let me know if you are coming, just so that we don't mess each other up tonight. Ryan said, will do, and then with that, he made his way back to Winnipeg. That evening, it did turn out that Ryan was going to be coming back out, so he sent TJ a text just letting him know, telling him that he was going to sit in the same spot that he sat that morning. TJ responded with, okay, sounds good. I'm going to be sitting over by my ladder stand on the rock in the bush. Now, where this rock was that TJ was going to be sitting on was located not very far away from his ladder tree stand, and it's in this big chunk of bush, and there's tons of deer trails that go through this piece of bush and all around this big rock, and it's nice and open in there, so he figured that was a good spot to sit with his girlfriend that night, just so that they would both not have to try to climb up into his double ladder stand. Once Ryan got back out to the property, he made his way back to that same spot that he had sat that morning, and all evening, periodically, he would text over to TJ, TJ would text back to him, and that evening, Ryan did not see very many deer. He only saw 2 deer that night. However, TJ and his girlfriend They saw absolutely nothing, and about an hour before dark, TJ's sitting there. He's sitting on his chair. His girlfriend's over to his right. They're both sitting incredibly quiet and still, looking through the bush out into this big clearing, looking for any sign of deer at all. When all of a sudden, off to his left, he heard clear as day somebody in a female voice say, "Hey, TJ." Quickly, he spun, turned, looked that direction, startled his girlfriend sitting to his right, who also turned and looked, and she ended up saying, "Hey, what's wrong?" And he looked at her and said, "Did you just say my name?" And she said, "No, I'm sitting quietly. I don't want to scare the deer." And he said, "Well, did you hear that then?" And she said, "Hear what?" And he's like, "Somebody just said, 'Hey, TJ,' right over there, and they were really close. I heard them clear as day." She looked at him and said, "I didn't hear anything. Like, do you think maybe it was the wind?" And TJ said, "No, this was definitely a woman's voice, and it was very close, like not even into the trees 10 yards away." With that, his girlfriend started to feel a little uneasy. TJ himself was feeling a little uneasy, and he was trying to figure out, did he imagine this? But he did hear this voice clear as day, and he just kept repeating it in his head, and it made him eventually, shortly before dark, decide, you know what, let's just walk out early. We're not going to sit right till dark because I'm not feeling very comfortable right now. I'm feeling a little bit on edge because of this voice I heard. So shortly before dark, him and his girlfriend got up. They made their way through the bush back up to the main gravel road. When Ryan ended up meeting up with them after dark at that main property, TJ ended up telling him about this voice, and Ryan was like, "Well, are you sure it wasn't the wind?" And TJ said, "I know what wind sounds like. This was definitely a female voice, and it was close to me." None of them had any idea what to make of this situation whatsoever, and they ended up brushing it off as just being the wind. Now, fast forward to the following Saturday. It's now muzzleloading season, and on this day, it was only going to be Dawn and Ryan heading out because TJ had something going on in the city and he was not going to be able to make it. That morning, in true Ryan fashion, he woke up late. He made his way over to Dawn's, picked them up, and then they made their way out to the location. Their plan for this morning was not to hunt that far north quarter. They were going to be hunting on the main property, which comprised of 3/4 sections that backed onto pretty much nearly endless public land. And in order to get where they were going to be hunting, they had to pull off the main gravel road up to this large cattle fence. So as soon as they reached that fence, Ryan stopped the truck. Don got out. He opened up the fence. Ryan drove through. Then Don closed it back up and hopped in the truck. Now, by this time, it was about 15 minutes before the start of legal light. So even though it's not full-on daylight yet, they could still see pretty good because it's by no means absolutely dark. So they could see into this main compound very clearly. Now, this compound is absolutely littered with all types of random things. There's old semi-trailers. There's an old ATCO trailer that used to be used as a hunting camp. There's this massive barn, and then there's this small hunting shack as well. And on top of that, there's these old random vehicles that are just kind of strewn all across this compound, along with old vehicle parts and building materials. Well, as these two guys are making their way towards this ATCO trailer, they look over. There's a spot between the ATCO trailer and this other trailer that you can actually see right through up towards that hunting shack. And all of a sudden, Dawn goes, "Hey, I guess TJ did come out." Ryan turns, looks at Dawn and says, "What are you talking about?" And Dawn goes, "Well, I think I just saw him. There's somebody smoking in between the trailer." Ryan's like, "Well, that doesn't make sense. I talked to TJ this morning. He said he was not going to be able to come out whatsoever. So who is this then? Because the only ones with permission are me, you, and TJ. So we should go see who this is." So they made their way up alongside this ATCO trailer, and immediately when they got to the end of it, Ryan turned the truck, almost half expecting to see TJ's truck sitting there. But there was nobody there whatsoever. There was no vehicle. They saw nobody standing there. And Don at this point's like, what's happening? I saw somebody. There was somebody standing there. They were wearing all black, and it looked like they were smoking. So at this point, they stopped the truck, put the truck in park. Both of them got out, and they wanted to go check just to make sure that there was nobody there. They spent a few minutes looking around, and they saw no sign of anybody whatsoever. Now, even though this compound is incredibly littered with random trailers and all that, in this one particular spot, there's really nowhere for anybody to hide. There's the main ACO trailer. There's an old wooden trailer that's completely sealed up. You could see underneath it clear as day. There's nobody under there, nobody in the ACO trailer. So Ryan at this point goes, well, are you sure you did just look between the trailer and, catch a glimpse of something else? And Don said, no, there was an obvious person. He's like, I saw a person standing beside the trailer, and it looked like they were smoking. Ryan at this point's like, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. There's nobody there. Don again, though, was being very adamant that he did see somebody smoking beside the trailer. And after a couple more minutes, they ended up deciding to try to just brush it off and carry on and go for their morning hunt. So they grabbed their gear, they made their way into their stands, and that morning they saw no deer whatsoever. They did not hear any, they did not see any, and they both found that to be pretty odd because these locations where they were typically very high producing spots where they would sit there, they would see multiple deer in a hunt, and that morning they saw nothing. They did find that to be a little bit strange, but they were like, you know what, we did get in pretty late. We probably pushed them up as we were walking in. Maybe we'll have better luck this evening. So they made their way back to the truck. They ended up having a fire in the compound. They made some food. Then they spent a couple of hours kind of walking around the property, just trying to see if, maybe they'd have some luck while out on a walk, they'd spook something up. They did see a couple of deer while walking around. And then that evening at about 4 o'clock, they decided they were going to go sit for the evening now. So Don was going to sit up in a stand on the main property, and Ryan was going to go back up to that north quarter. So he got Don all settled with all his gear at the main property, wished him luck, hopped in his truck, made about a half a mile drive down the road to this other property, parked his truck where he always parks it, grabs his muzzleloader, grabs his backpack, and then makes his way up to that cut line where he had sat during archery. That evening, he sat in the same spot he had sat those days during archery. He did at one point catch a glimpse of a deer on the alfalfa, but he was not able to get a shot at it. And then at the end of legal light, where now, even though legal light is ended, there's still a fair bit of light. You could still see pretty good. There's still sun rays at times shining down. So you can see very well. It's definitely not pitch black. So once legal light ended, he grabbed his stuff, got up, started making his way out onto the alfalfa. And once he was on the alfalfa, he was making his way over towards the barley. He stopped, he turned around, looked to the far north side of that alfalfa field where they have this big hub-style pop-up blind right in this corner. And when he looked towards the tent, he all of a sudden noticed that just to the left of it, there were these three dark figures that looked like people standing basically in a straight line just to the left of his blind. He stood there for a second looking directly at these figures, wondering in his head, like, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing right now? Are there three people standing by my tent? And why the hell are they dressed in dark colors? Like, why are they wearing all black? Like, it's gun season. You have to wear blaze orange if you're out hunting. And, if you're not hunting, you definitely should not be wearing black. So he's looking, but he could not quite make out any real features. So he decides he's going to reach into his pocket to pull out his rangefinder, which has about a 7x zoom, just so he could get a better look. He did not want to point his muzzleloader in this direction and look through the scope because he did not know at this point if these were people, and he did not want to be pointing a loaded firearm towards people. So he reached in his pocket, pulled out his rangefinder, lifted it up, and when he looked through it towards the tent where those figures were, he saw nothing. He could just see the trees. There were no more figures standing beside the tent. So he's like, what the heck? He's like, that's weird. He pulls his rangefinder down, and as soon as he pulled it down, he looked back up, and those figures were back. At this point, Ryan was feeling incredibly creeped out because he saw these figures there, and then as soon as he tried to get a better look with zoom, they disappeared, and now they're back again. And he instantly thought back to that morning when Dawn had seen a figure standing beside the trailer smoking. And at this point, Ryan was starting to feel very uneasy, and he just wanted to get out of there. So he quickly started making his way towards that barley. After every 5 or 6 steps, he would turn around, look back, and those figures continued to stay right beside his blind. Once he got around the corner and now he can no longer see up into that alfalfa field, he picked the pace up and went straight back to his truck. Once he was at the truck, he started it up and he quickly sped down the road to where Don was. He ended up picking Don up, and he told him exactly what had happened to him and what he had seen. And based on what he described to Don that these figures looked like, matched exactly to what Don had seen that morning. Both of them were at this point feeling a little bit creeped out, but they were feeling pretty good because they were in the truck. On their drive back to the city, they ended up calling up TJ and told TJ about these figures. And TJ said, I don't know what's going on out at the property, but we had those cameras that were turned off. Again, that could have been no big deal whatsoever. But you heard somebody coughing immediately after you coughed. Then I heard that voice. Now you're saying that Dawn saw somebody standing and smoking, or what appeared to be smoking, right beside that ATCO trailer. And now you saw these 3 figures over by the blind. He's like, I don't know what's going on, but there's something definitely off and something wrong at the property right now. He said, I'm feeling pretty uneasy. He's like, I was going to go out there tomorrow morning by myself, but I'm not going to go out there unless somebody else comes. And when he said that, Ryan and Don both started to think about those experiences that they had as well. And they couldn't help but think that maybe all these different things were connected. The trail cameras being turned off, the voices, the coughing, and now those figures. They ended up talking about these experiences a little bit more, and then very slowly they started opening up to each other and confessing that in the past on these properties, especially if they were alone, they've had the occasional feeling of being watched as well as the occasional feeling of dread. Now, they have no idea what to make of all this, but they do feel like all of these different experiences are definitely connected, and they are very convinced that there is 100% something on these properties. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I'd really like to know your thoughts on this, just because there's so many different things happening with these different experiences. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.